So there's sort of an overview of an office telephone system and how it all works and how it relates to the POTS network and how Norstar comes into play with all this. Now I'll actually get into who Northern Telecom are and a little bit of history about them. Basically, where it all starts is when the telephone was invented in the 1870s. You had the Bell Telephone Company in the United States that both manufactured telephones and provided the telephone services for people to use so they could have a telephone. And eventually, I think in the 1880s, this was split into two major arms. You had AT&T, which provided the telephone services, and Western Electric, which manufactured the telephones themselves and other telephone equipment. And basically at this time, the Bell Telephone Company also operated in Canada as the Bell Telephone Company of Canada. So it was an American company with a Canadian branch. And it very much operated the same way in Canada as it did in the United States. In the beginning, the Bell Telephone Company in Canada provided not only services, but they also manufactured telephones themselves. And eventually, the Bell Telephone Company of Canada was split up in the same way that the American branch was. You had the part of the company that provides services, which became Bell Canada, and then you had the company that manufactured the telephone equipment, which became Northern Electric. And this was in the 1880s again. So imagine this, in the United States, you had AT&T and Western Electric. In Canada, you had Bell Canada and Northern Electric. And Northern Electric was the company that eventually renamed themselves to Northern Telecom, I think in the 1960s. So that's sort of how Northern Telecom got their start, and just like Western Electric in the United States, Northern Telecom was by far the most important and largest manufacturer of telephones and telephone equipment in Canada. And Northern Telecom did manufacture stuff that was sold in the United States as well. Norstar was sold in the United States, and as well as a lot of Northern Telecom's other products. Northern Telecom really rose to fame in the 1970s when they introduced the DMS-100, which was the first entirely solid-state public telephone exchange. So at this point, telephone exchanges were still relay-based and mechanical-based, and if you found a rural enough community, they were still manually operated with an operator. And Northern Telecom introduced the very first totally electronic, digitally controlled telephone switch, and that was the DMS-100. And the DMS-100 set the standard so much so that they are still in use today. We are only now, in the past few years, beginning to pull out the DMS-100 switches, take them out of service, and replace them with modernized voice-over IP-based telephone exchanges. That's how popular they were, and you can find pictures of DMS-100 systems online. They're just towering machines. They're really, really impressive and incredibly complex. And they set the standard from probably the late 70s, early 80s, up until just a few years ago with the explosion of IP telephony. And, the people who are well versed in maintaining and repairing DMS-100 equipment now starting to retire and die and everything like that. They're finally starting to get replaced. But yeah, that was Northern Telecom's first big breakthrough. And something kind of neat, I don't know this for sure, but if I had to guess, the Northern Telecom DMS-100 was probably the first time that Canadians heard the telephone signals and dial tone and ringing tones and stuff like that are still in use today. That was probably introduced with the DMS-100 in Canada, possibly even the United States, but I would assume that Western Electric came up with something earlier that introduced, those sounds and then the DMS 100 sort of borrowed those. And to my viewers outside of North America, if you've never heard a North American dial tone, your dial tone sounds different. Our dial tone sounds like this. And we also have a busy signal that sounds like this. That's when the North American telephone signals sound like, and I would assume that in Canada, Canadians first heard those sounds when the DMS 100 switches started getting installed. Also in the 1970s, Northern Telecom came out with their first PBX system, two of them actually. They were called the Meridian SL-1 and the Meridian SL-100, and they were the first totally solid-state PBX systems. And they were fairly popular. Popular enough, in fact, that the Meridian SL-100 stayed in production for, I think, 20 or 25 years. I think right up until like the late 1990s, the Meridian SL-100 was in production. The SL-1 was they were both enterprise class PBX systems. The SL-1 was meant for smaller businesses, and the SL-100 was meant for larger businesses. And yeah, both of them were fairly popular. The SL-1 was discontinued in the early 1990s, but the SL-100 continued right up until the late 1990s. There wasn't a need to replace it with a newer product, just because it was so good and so advanced and expandable for its time.
Behind these high-powered cars is a high-powered corporation. As vital to Porsche's business as delivering on their promise of quality is fast, reliable, high-performance communications. To meet their complex communications needs today, as well as fuel their future growth, Porsche Cars North America turned to another internationally recognized name for quality: Northern Telecom's Meridian SL-1. The Meridian SL-1's feature-rich networking capabilities, with its power to deliver ISDN benefits today, gives Porsche the inside track in their industry.
And then in 1984, Northern Telecom tried hitting the small PBX market with a system called Vantage. And Vantage wasn't very popular. You don't see a lot of Vantage stuff, in fact. I had never even heard of it until I did extensive research and managed to find a couple of web pages talking about it. It wasn't popular at all. It was poorly priced and not very well featured. And other companies already had products in place that people preferred, so Vantage really didn't make a dent in the marketplace at all. But then, in 1988, Northern Telecom introduced what would be the replacement for the Vantage. They got their act together and just put every bit of effort they could into the Vantage's replacement, and this was it. It was Norstar in 1988, and Norstar just took the world by storm. Norstar was incredible because it was very well priced and incredibly modern. Norstar introduced a lot of features that were previously only in the SL-1 and SL-100 PBXs. And it was so incredibly modern, extremely easy to use, easy to administer, easy to maintain and repair, easy to install, and it was entirely digital, like the SL-1 and SL-100, and it was just so advanced and had so many large PBX features in a small PBX system that it blew all the competition out of the water. And Norstar became the small office phone system standard for 20 years, over 20 years. As a matter of fact, Norstar PBXs and phones remained in continuous production until 2011. If I remember right, it was in 2011 when Norstar was finally discontinued. Now, I should mention, shortly after Norstar came out in 1990, Northern Telecom introduced Meridian 1, which was the replacement for the Meridian SL-1. So the small enterprise class PBX, and Meridian 1 also took the world by storm just as much as Norstar did. Meridian 1 was again incredibly advanced and high tech for its time, and it was so expandable and so future-proof that it also remained in production until around 2010-2011, and it was just amazing. Those were the two big PBX hits for Northern Telecom, were Norstar and Meridian 1, in addition to the Meridian SL-100, which remained popular enough that it remained in production even though it was a legacy product. Although the Meridian 1 PBXs replaced the SL-1, because the SL-100 was a huge, large enterprise PBX, there really wasn't a Meridian 1 system to replace it. So the Meridian SL-100 stayed as Northern Telecom's largest and most expandable PBX system. So yeah, throughout the 1990s, Northern Telecom owned the PBX market with Norstar and Meridian 1, as well as SL100. The three of those together made up the vast majority of the office telephone market. It was just incredible. Unfortunately, it was all downhill from there. In the mid-1990s, Northern Telecom saw the rise of the internet, and with the growing of the dot-com bubble in the late 90s, Northern Telecom decided that it was a smart idea to get rid of all of their telecom businesses and focus on networking and internet. And they sucked at it. They tried it, they sucked at it, and that was the end of them. From probably about 1998, 1999 onward, Northern Telecom went way downhill. They sold their POTS phone and Meridian 1 phone manufacturing to a company called Astra Telecom, and they sold the Norstar and Meridian 1 PBX manufacturing to a company called Avaya. And Astra prospered, Avaya prospered. Northern Telecom tried to do internet stuff. They sucked at it. They failed. They went out of business in, I think, 2012. They still exist only as a holding company. They went from 100,000 employees in the 90s to, I think, around 10 employees right now, and their only jobs is to continue selling off Northern Telecom's assets. So yeah, they did a thing that was really stupid, and they paid for it, and that was the end of it. So Avaya kept making the Norstar and Meridian 1 PBXs and phones, and that they did well until 2010, 2011. They decided, Avaya had their own products that were more modern. They really wanted to get into IP telephony. Businesses were really switching to IP telephony, and Cisco was sort of the king of that market. So there still are lots of businesses that are loyal to their Norstar and Meridian 1 systems, but new businesses were switching to IP-based telephony, and Avaya decided it was time for Norstar and Meridian 1 to go, and they discontinued them. They ended support for Norstar in, I think, 2015, and support for Meridian 1 ended in 2016. So as of last year, Norstar and Meridian 1 are totally dead. They are completely obsolete products. You can't get support you can't get manufacturer support. However, you still see lots of Norstar and lots of Meridian 1 systems still in place. We had Meridian 1 telephones when I worked for Bell Canada. We had lots of those in the office, and we have lots of those where I'm working right now. And I still see businesses running Norstar systems, retail stores and stuff. I believe Shoppers Drug Mart, at least some Shoppers Drug Mart stores here in Canada, are still running Norstar systems. And a couple of years ago, a brand new Giant Tiger store opened up in my hometown, and they're using a Norstar system, which is just really cool. It's really cool to see. So these are technically dead, but you still see them around. I mean, these work so well, they don't break. They never break down, and you can still get, you can find third-party people, to repair them if something goes wrong. There's still a few people around. I'm certainly now someone who could possibly work on a Norstar system if somebody asked me to, at least for basic stuff anyway. So yeah, you still see these around even though they're totally obsolete, and that's kind of cool. So you had 3 lines of PBXs from Northern Telecom in the 1990s. You had Norstar, which was the smallest system, meant for, retail stores and really small offices. You had Meridian 1, which was the small enterprise system. You'd find them in hospitals and medium-sized businesses, some large businesses. And then you had the SL-100, which was basically a bigger version of the Meridian 1, meant for large businesses and, really large installations, stuff like that. So each line had several different systems available. Norstar had a few different PBXs available. In the beginning, there were 2 of them. They were the 6x16, which is what I have, and a system called the modular ICS. And then later, you had more Norstar systems. There was the 3x8, the 8x24, and the compact ICS. So basically, what it all means is, for example, the 3x8 was the smallest system of the bunch. It could support 3 outside lines and up to 8 Norstar phones. So that's something you'd put in like a really small store, like a grocery store or something like that. 3 outside lines, 8 phones. And it wasn't expandable from that. My unit, the 6x16, was basically the 3x8's bigger brother. You had 6 outside lines and 16 phones. And then bigger still was the 8x24, 8 outside lines, 24 phones. But the 8x24 could actually be expanded. It was actually expandable. You could slot expansion cards into it that would add even more outside lines and phones. I regrettably forget what the capacity was, but it was something on the order of I think 24 or 32 outside lines and 100 phones or something like that, but I don't remember anymore. The next system up from that was the compact ICS, which I think was the last Norstar PBX ever introduced. It was only introduced in the late 90s, I think. And the compact ICS was an expandable unit. It started out as an 4x8. The compact ICS in its base configuration was a 4x8, 4 outside lines, 8 phones. But you could expand it to something like, I think something like 8 outside lines and 32 phones. And then the modular ICS was the biggest Norstar PBX of them all. I forget what the modular ICS was in its base configuration. I think it was something like a 8x32 or something like that. But in its top configuration, you could have up to a few dozen lines and a couple hundred phones. So you could get a Norstar system that was fairly impressively large. But then you had the Meridian 1 PBXs, which were just on a whole nother level from the Norstar systems. The smallest Meridian 1 PBX was called the Option 11, and with that you could have up to a few hundred lines and a few hundred phones. And the largest Meridian 1 system was the Option 81, and that was a few thousand lines and a few thousand phones. And then with the Meridian SL-100, you could have tens of thousands of lines and tens of thousands of phones. So the SL-100 was, I think physically they were almost the size of a DMS-100 cabinet. They were just absolutely massive systems. Now you may be wondering, I've been talking about these 2 different things primarily, Norstar and Meridian 1. But if you look up here, my Norstar cabinet has a Meridian logo on it, and in fact, this black phone here also has the Meridian logo on it. So you might ask me, what the heck, why am I calling it Norstar? It doesn't even say Norstar anywhere. It just says Meridian. Well, all of Northern Telecom's PBX products were ultimately under the Meridian name, sort of the umbrella name. And then under the Meridian name, you had the Norstar, the Meridian 1, and the Meridian SL-1 and SL-100. So it was kind of an umbrella name. It was poorly marketed in such a way, kind of confusing. But later, in the mid-90s, Northern Telecom actually ditched the Meridian name and they renamed everything to Norstar. This was Norstar, and the new phones had a Norstar logo on them. And then you had the Meridian 1. So a little bit of confusion on that part. It is important to note Norstar phones will not work on a Meridian 1 PBX and vice versa. So, you know, if you get a hold of, for example, a Norstar cabinet and you've got some Northern Telecom phones that look sort of similar, but you're not sure if they're Norstar or Meridian 1 phones, you've got to find that out because Meridian 1 phones will not work on a Norstar cabinet. The biggest difference between them is that the Meridian 1 phones have a hinged display that you can tilt, whereas with Norstar, the display's built into the body of the phone. Now, I've got a little confession to make. You've heard me constantly refer to Norstar as a PBX. However, that's technically not true. Norstar is technically, actually, a relative to a PBX called a KSU. KSU stands for Key Service Unit. The Vantage, which preceded Norstar, was a key service unit as well. Basically, the difference between a KSU and a PBX is that while a PBX makes the multiple outside lines opaque to the end user of the phone, you just pick up the phone and you hear a dial tone and you dial a number and you get out. With a key service unit, in the classic definition of a key service unit, line selection is done manually. So with a classic key service unit, each phone would have a button for each outside line, as well as a light for each outside line to show if the line was free or in use. And you'd press a button for what outside line you want and dial your number. And that's technically what Norstar is because you can configure it as such. For example, my PBX here handles up to 6 outside lines. I can, if I want to, configure things. If I had 6 outside lines running into my unit, I could have a button, 6 buttons, one for each outside line, pick which line I want to dial on and dial the number. But Norstar is so modern and so advanced and so PBX-like that it basically functionally is a PBX. While you can configure Norstar to have manual line selection, it can also be done automatically. You can configure Norstar such that you pick up the phone and it automatically selects a line based on which line is free, just like Meridian 1. So Norstar is so advanced and so high-tech and has a lot of features that were carried over from the Meridian 1 that it's functionally a PBX. It was marketed as a KSU, but it's functionally a PBX. And, because Norstar and Meridian 1 have so many commonalities between them, the lines have really been blurred. And for that reason, I personally call Norstar a PBX. And a lot of other people do too. So that's what I'm sticking with. But I thought I'd give that little explanation regardless that Norstar is, in the technical sense, a key service unit and not a true PBX. But it can function like a true PBX if you wanted to.